Christa Pike has been on death row for 30 years, the only woman facing execution in Tennessee.
From the very beginning, we were looking for a humane way to carry this out.
January 1995, Christa Pike had decided in her mind that Colleen had eyes on her boyfriend. Christa and Daryl slowly and deliberately murdered Colleen Slemmer.
She is pushing back against lethal injection.
That superadded pain violates the Eighth Amendment.
Her defense is saying another option that they put forth, hanging.
With hanging, there is no need to strap Ms. Pike to a gurney for her to lie there reliving her sexual assaults by the involuntary actions of her traumatized brain.
There is just a lot of heat right now legally over how the state has handled executions by lethal injection. This will surely go up to the United States Supreme Court. We do not know what ultimately will happen.
Welcome to Behind the Headline. The only woman on Tennessee's death row is fighting how the state plans to put her to death. Convicted killer Christa Pike says her medical condition will lead to unnecessary pain given the lethal injection. Almost 3 decades after she was convicted of killing her fellow Job Corps student, the state is set to put Pike to death later next month. 2 of our newsroom colleagues were in the courtroom this week to watch this hearing play out. Joining me now, Chief Investigative Journalist John North and News 10 News reporter Nicole Borman. Thank you both for being with us to recount what you all heard play out in the courtroom. But let's wind the clock back and to 1995 when this crime happened. John, you and I were here, reporters covering it. Let's recount for us the beginnings of this case.
January 1995, Christa Pike is taking part in a federal program called Job Corps, which was kind of a job career training program for kids maybe who hadn't done well in other settings like traditional public school. It was kind of a second chance for them. That gives you a sign that she had had a rough childhood, which is correct. She had a rough start. But so had a lot of the other kids that were taking part in that. Anyway, she was in Job Corps here in Knoxville. So was a young woman from Florida named Colleen Slemmer, who ended up being the victim. Another person taking part in Job Corps was Christa's boyfriend, a 17-year-old guy from Memphis named Daryl Shipp. And then there was a young woman who was sort of a friend of theirs that hung out named Shadala Peterson, who was, I think, from Bradley County. Anyway, Christa had decided in her mind that Colleen had eyes on her boyfriend and she was going to fix Colleen. On the premise of let's go smoke some weed together, they all set out one night from Job Corps, walked down the Cumberland Avenue Strip into Tyson Park, and there Christa and Daryl had brought a small meat cleaver and a box cutter with intention of harming Colleen. In the dark at 8, 9 o'clock at night in January on a rainy night, Christa and Daryl began to beat, cut, and torture, essentially, Colleen. By Christa's own recount, this went on 30 minutes to an hour as they slowly and deliberately murdered Colleen Slemmer.
And to such a grotesque degree. I remember reporting they carved a pentagram into her chest.
While she was alive. And then bashed her head with a rock. And as a result, Christa takes a piece of her skull as a souvenir. They did everything, I think, you can imagine to humiliate another human being. That's really what happened that night. She begged for her life. She said, let me go. I'll go to Florida. I won't tell anybody. She's bleeding from multiple places, scratches, cuts on her chest, her back, deep wounds, superficial wounds. It went on and on and on. But Christa was determined to kill Colleen. At one point, as Colleen was slowly dying, Christa leaned over to Colleen and said, "Do you know who is doing this to you?" At that point, Colleen may have just been moaning, but then, as you mentioned, she bashed the side of her skull in with a piece of asphalt, and as a souvenir, plucked a piece of her skull and took it away with her in her jacket.
Ultimately, they would be identified as the suspects in the murder of Slemmer and stand trial the next year.
That's right. Christa stood trial first. It was a death penalty case. The state understandably argued that this was heinous, atrocious, and cruel, which is statutory language, which means this is so bad that you need to face the ultimate punishment. And a Knox County jury agreed, and that's what Christa got. And she's been on death row ever since.
30 years.
30 years.
30 years. She is 50 years old today.
She is 50 currently, yeah.
Okay, so let's fast forward to this week. She has a date with lethal injection next month, but she is fighting this form of execution. Thus, the reason for this hearing this week. Nicole, give us the big overview of what the point of this hearing was this week. What is she wanting out of this?
Well, her lawyers definitely specify that the ultimate goal is to find a less torturous, less painful way to go. And so they proposed a central line, which is a vein that's closer to your chest instead of the IVs that go through your arms. And then also hanging, which was a big surprise when we were there because hanging hasn't been done in Tennessee since 1913, over 100 years ago. And so the defense really put to play this kind of argument that might not be possible. And it also argues that them wanting to have a less painful, less likely of having mistakes, there's really no, way to put that. But yeah.
We'll get into the hanging, but let's talk about the reason why she is pushing back against lethal injection. Mm-hmm. She has a condition that they say will cause unnecessary harm. What is this condition she is dealing with?
It's a blood condition. Mm-hmm. There's a medical term for it, which I won't try to pronounce. Maybe you can.
Thrombocytosis.
Yeah.
Very good.
It is essentially, and she does have it, it's true, mm-hmm. although there's a question of how severe it is. That was part of what we heard in the court hearing, which is basically a platelet problem, too many platelets, and the Pike team argued that if you subject her to this kind of intravenous experience, she's going to have a horrible reaction to it. It's going to cause massive platelets. It's also going to cause excessive bleeding at the source. It's going to cause immense suffering beyond what is okay, if you will. So that was one of their major points, and it was one of the points of contention from experts that we heard during the hearing.
We do want to make note that she was not physically in the courtroom this week.
We sort of, at first she was going to be. There was a transport order for her. She's at the Deborah Johnson Center, which is in Nashville. She was going to be moved here to the very same courtroom where she was convicted, by the way, in the city-county building. But then at the last minute, there was a change of thinking. So she watched it all remotely by video link.
What was her reaction during this? I have to think you were listening, of course, to what was being said in the courtroom, but watching her remotely.
Well, for the most part, I didn't see much of a reaction. She did have another woman in the room with her. That was a request through her lawyers at the very beginning of the trial on Tuesday. And
do we know who that woman was? Was it her attorney, or was it ever made clear?
I think it was specified.
She's an attorney from a past case, not this one, but from a past case that Christa's been involved in. It was interesting as the hearing was starting last Tuesday. The Pike team stood up and said, "Judge, there is an attorney at the prison gate or at the prison lobby who wants to come in and sit with Christa, and we think that she ought to be allowed to do that." And there was a little bit of back and forth, and then ultimately prison officials, and I'm sure the judge, are like, that's fine. So we saw her sitting by her side in video for most of those 3 days.
But there was one part. I do remember that when the psychologist came in and was retelling us the stories of her childhood traumas, she was definitely, kind of living through that. I could imagine the emotions of hearing that back again. she was definitely making reactions during that.
Not to go too far into it, but give us the extent of the trauma she sustained.
Well, she did experience a series of rapes before the age of 18. They told us one was when she was in pre-K by her grandmother's boyfriend husband. Another one was when she was 11 by a neighbor. And then again when she was 17 by a stranger. And it was, I think that last rape did happen almost a year before the crime happened. And then above that, they also told us about a level of abuse from the grandmother, from grandma's boyfriends, from the sister, and just a series of horrible things to happen to someone. And both sides of this entire argument agreed that there's no question that she had a really rough childhood and that took a toll on her life.
You had mentioned hanging. They're pushing back on lethal injection, but then her attorneys offer up hanging. When I heard that, I did what hanging in Tennessee? That is not on the table, right?
No, it's not a method of execution that the state still uses. I think 1913 was the last time that the state hangs somebody. It's rarely used in the United States. I think we heard maybe the state of Washington has done it.
1996 also there was one, yeah.
But it's not, it isn't real in terms of something that could happen. Now, statutorily, for inmates convicted at a time like Christa was, who have been on death row that long, there is another option, which is electrocution. And we have had some inmates in the state of Tennessee, I've watched one, where the inmate, Nikki Sutton, was like, I don't want to do lethal injection. I'll accept electrocution. And so that's what happened, and he's not the only one. But Pike is not interested in electrocution. She offered up hanging instead.
And a lot of this discussion is on the heels of a botched execution, lethal execution, earlier this year, in which they were trying to administer in the inmate the line to administer the lethal injection, and for an hour could not do that. This is something that they are hanging on to in going forth in this case, right?
It was really fascinating to watch this unfold because we heard the testimony of the attorney for the fellow you just mentioned, Tony Carruthers, who was there in the death chamber because she was allowed to be, while they were trying to find veins to kill Tony Carruthers. She was there. This happened in May. As you said, it was botched. It didn't work out. After an hour, they gave up. But we don't hear this kind of testimony. We do not hear this kind of testimony. And even though it's got nothing to do with the 5 points that were being debated and discussed this week or in Knox County in court, it still was incredibly fascinating to hear what can happen when things go wrong.
Let's take a listen. We have that on tape.
Okay, so the 3 members of the IB team were trying to establish access. After about 7 minutes, they got access in his right arm, and then they moved on to his left arm, and that is when they were unable to get a vein. That took about, it was from like 10:32 to 10:44 is when they were trying to put it in his left arm. And I noted about 6 or 7 sticks. They then, each time a needle was used, they would drop it into the receptacle. And that was a corrections officer who was putting the needles. The corrections officer was handing the IB team the needles and then putting them into the receptacle. And then at one point, one of the IB team members said that they had gotten a flash, but it wouldn't flow. And then another team member said that the line was not infiltrating but not flowing. I noted visible effort on the faces of the IB team member as they tried to gain access, some sort of grunting and pushing. And Mr. Carruthers was wincing through most of these needle sticks. And then they moved to his left hand, and that was at approximately 10:48. They tried to get access into his left hand, and then they said it was not flowing, that the IV was not flowing. And then at 10:54, so we got into the chamber At 10:22 is when they were when they started trapping him in. They started IV access at 10:24, and then 30 minutes later, they hadn't yet established an IV, and that is when the physician entered the room.
Did they ask?
Do you want me to continue?
Yes, but let me ask a question first. Did they ask the physician to come in, or?
I don't know. So it was, they were not speaking out loud. They were communicating via like hand signals and talking in like very low tones. I could hear them say things about the veins rolling and not access and all that, but they were like communicating via hand signals to like I guess a two-way mirror. So I don't know if one of those hand signals indicated for the physician to come out. I just know that the physician came out.
And what happened when the physician came in the chamber?
When the physician came out.
Objection relevance. This has been clearly ruled on by the court, and there's no need to offer any proof on it.
Your Honor, we could stipulate to her declaration concerning the physician's appearance in the chamber, but I do think we are allowed to make an offer of proof to preserve the record for the Tennessee Supreme Court as well as for the Supreme Court.
How long is this going to be?
It shouldn't be much longer, Your Honor.
Go ahead.
Okay, continue.
When the physician came into the room, I'm just going to use physician so that I don't run afoul of the court's order. When the physician came into the room, the physician instructed the IV team to take off Tony's socks to look for veins in his feet. At 10:56, they took out an infrared vein finder and dimmed the lights so they could try to use the vein finder. At 10:57, the physician said they got a flash, but it wouldn't run, and that was in Tony's feet. I couldn't tell if they actually got the line in his foot or not, but they were sticking him in his feet. And at that point, I asked the warden when he was going to stop this, and he said he would not intervene unless instructed. And at that point, I asked to use the phone. There is a phone in the chamber and in the media room, but they would not let me use that phone. They escorted myself and the Attorney General out of the chamber, so I was out of view of my client. And then I used a phone that was in the cell area where Tony had been. They had to plug it in so that it would work because it was unplugged. And then I was able to contact co-counsel to tell them what was going on because I had a sense that the next potential part was going to be the central line, and I wanted to sort of let them know what was going on. This was obviously something that was going very wrong. So I couldn't see or hear anything that was happening in the chamber for those few moments that I was on the phone. And then I returned to the chamber at 11:06, and the physician and the IV team were still trying to gain access into Mr. Crothers' left foot. Again, Mr. Crothers was wincing and appeared to be in pain. The physician then announced that he was going to place a central line. But before he did that, at 11:09, the physician asked members of the IV team if any of them had experience with jugular access. One of the team members said they did. So then the IV team and the physician undid these chest straps that Tony was strapped to the gurney, and turned his head to the side and then started to feel around Tony's neck. At 11:10, they turned down the lights and brought out the infrared vein finder, again, that they had used on his feet to try to assess his neck. And then at that point, the IV team member who had indicated that IV team member knew how to do jugular access said that he didn't feel like he could do this. And then it was determined by the physician that the physician was going to place a drape over Tony's face and body to do the central line. And at 11:14, the physician asked whether the patient was allergic to lidocaine, referring to Mr. Crothers as the patient. The prison staff didn't know. At 11:15, the physician stuck Tony with the needle and administered the lidocaine just below his right clavicle. They said they would wait 5 minutes for that to take effect. I asked again to use the phone and went back out, and I was out of sight for those 5 minutes talking to counsel, explaining what was happening, and opposing co-counsel let me know that in a previous deposition, the physician had indicated that the physician was not qualified or had hospital privileges to set a central line, and they advised me to object. I went back into the execution chamber, and the physician was standing over Tony. I did object that the physician was not qualified to place the central line. The physician snapped back to me, yes, I am too qualified. The warden said, "Doctor, do your job." At 11:20, the physician began poking Tony with a needle in the area where he had administered the lidocaine, which was below his right clavicle. He asked Tony if it hurt. Tony said yes, he could feel it. The physician responded, well, it may just be some pressure. And then at then after that, the physician proceeded to insert the needle under Tony's right clavicle. Tony began gutturally groaning and said, "It hurts, it hurts." I later learned that this groaning, this sort of moaning and groaning, was audible to the media witnesses that were behind the curtain. I noted about a $50 sized amount of blood. The blood was oozing from the puncture wound, and then the physician would wipe it away as the blood was coming out. I observed at least 2 attempts to insert the needle, so I could see at least 2 puncture wounds. It's possible that there were more, but I'm certain there were at least 2. And the physician tried to thread something into one of the spots where he had inserted the needle. Tony was moaning and groaning in pain this entire time, a sound that I can still hear. It was incredibly vivid and very clearly painful. At 11:22, the physician said they would not be able to set a central line. And then the physician started to try to get IV access into Tony's right shoulder, which was, again, the same arm where the first IV access was. At 11:28, the physician appeared to set a line in Tony's shoulder. I could see blood backfilling the line, so I don't know if it was flowing. Like, it was very clearly to see blood in the line. At 11:30, someone announced that they had flow. At this point, at 11:30, Tony had a line sticking out of his right arm and right shoulder, and there was visible blood backfilling the shoulder line. At approximately 11:34, the warden left the room and then came back, and at 11:40, one of the phones on the wall of the execution chamber rang, and the warden answered. I could only, of course, hear the warden's end of the conversation, but when he hung up, he said, "We were not moving forward with the execution," and he said, "Now," and I said, "Does that mean," I didn't know if that meant like right now or today, and he just said, "Not now," and instructed the IB team to remove the IB lines and take Tony back to his cell. As they did that, I could see blood filling the lines. Tony was clearly in pain, and I would say over the course of the process, he was stuck over a dozen times. I asked Tony to be evaluated by medical staff, and then they took him back to his cell, and they took me out of the execution chamber back to the front building, and they said I would be able to see him once he was taken back to like the death watch area, not the same death watch area. He was taken to like back to the unit, but not, it's still in isolation.
We just heard from the attorney from the ACLU describing that botched lethal injection attempt with Tony Carruthers. And this is, as we've mentioned, this is what the defense for Christa Pike has been holding on to and putting forth, given her condition. She has, simply put, small veins, right? Mm-hmm. And they are saying this could create unnecessary pain. How did they describe what potentially she could experience in that scenario?
Well, they mentioned to us that for the lethal injection, they used pentobarbital. And one of the experts had described that that's a chemical that's equivalent to Drano or bleach, seemingly being pushed into your veins. And the needle size was a huge discussion. So when she's done testing for something called a phlebotomy, they've used a butterfly needle, which is basically a small enough needle that it's typically used for children and for babies. And they're saying that because of her condition, she also has veins that are that small. And if they used a needle that was larger, which typically is what's carried out for these executions, and those are the types of needles that are put on the carts for them to use for the IV, it could essentially maybe tear her veins. And if pentobarbital were to go into the body tissue, it creates this burning sensation, and it feels like you're burning from the inside, which is an excruciating pain. And that was their argument, that this is cruel and unusual punishment, and there needs to be adjustments made so that she doesn't have to experience that in her last moments of life.
As Nicole mentioned, phlebotomy, she's been exposed to that before. It's basically a blood draw. That's what that is. And what the Pike team was trying to say is she's already had numerous blood draws in life, and that further aggravates the veins and their condition and makes her more vulnerable. However, we also heard testimony that, based on an examination of the records of those blood draws, that said, well, in almost all of them, they got blood in the first crack at it, if you will, as opposed to repeated stickings. And I think there was testimony that it appears there's a record of one where they had to do 2 sticks to do the blood draw. So that became a point of contention as well. But like Nicole says, she says, I've got small veins. I've already had blood draws. That weakens my veins. And you are putting me at enormous risk of great suffering if this gets screwed up.
So her defense is saying another option that they put forth, hanging.
With hanging, there is no need to strap Ms. Pike to a gurney, no need to prod and find venous access, and no need for her to lie there reliving her sexual assaults by the involuntary actions of her traumatized brain.
Now, both experts testify that if it's done right, hanging can be instant. But it's not always done right. And it's not easy to do right. And there's been no evidence presented that Tennessee could do it right.
And there was actually an expert who came in to discuss this method of execution?
Yeah. Nicole and I can talk about that. I mean, let's be honest, I don't know that there really is an expert in judicial hanging because it's not done anymore. It's considered sort of barbaric. I mean, I remember, if you've ever seen In Cold Blood, I don't know if you remember what happened to those 2 men involved in the Clutter killings in Kansas. They were hanged in Lansing at the prison there. That was in the mid-1960s. It doesn't happen anymore. It just doesn't happen. It's considered one of those, oh my God, we're not going to do that. But they offered it as an alternative, and so yes, the Pike team put up a gentleman who is very knowledgeable about emergency medical services to testify. I think he was like, I can talk about what happens to you physically, once the noose is put around your neck, because he has dealt with autopsies or injuries, medical injuries, where people have tried to kill themselves. But then it took a very significant sort of side road and kind of fell off the rails.
Yeah, there was a conversation where he just couldn't find, or he had found, where they were trying to push that if you are hung, you die quicker. And that was what they were kind of getting at, is there's not going to be this prolonged period of pain and torture if you get hanged. And so he had this information that proved like you would stop feeling it or you would die within 10 to 20 seconds. But there was no actual factual data to support that. And it was something that the defense definitely put on, being like, there's not any scientific evidence to prove that that's true. And it took this long turn where he was trying to find it. We went on recess twice. And eventually he found the information that said that it would be a minimum 15 seconds. But it just had already gotten to this point where the judge just kind of stood his ground and said, I don't think a hanging expert exists. I don't think that there is a judicial hanging expert, and especially not the experts that were brought to court.
Let's talk about, for lack of a better way of putting it, the wins and losses for Pike's defense. First off, the wins. What do you see are some of the wins through this, by way of this hearing?
Well, one of them I do think was the expert that came in to discuss the 2 men in Washington that were hanged. She explained to us that even though both of them were hanged, I believe it was a year apart from one another, they both experienced instantaneous death. And that was something that her team really wanted to get at, was that this is something that could help with the issue we have of her having a prolonged period of torture before her death. And with all the trauma that she experienced when she was a child, you know, that they wanted to make sure that there were adjustments made so that she didn't have to relive those moments in the last minutes that she died. And if there were to be a lethal injection, they would have to strap her to a gurney. She would be surrounded by a group of people. She was hoping for women. There's no promise of that right now. There's a possibility that there could be men that will bring back those memories of her torture when she was
in
younger.
the execution chamber.
Yes.
She wants all females.
Yes.
In there.
Yeah. There have been some concessions. There were concessions before the hearing started and some as it started about some of the points that she was talking about. Like Nicole says, Christa, the protocol really for men, but we only have one woman who's on death row. The protocol is you spend 2 weeks essentially being constantly watched at Riverbend, which is the men's prison. That's not going to happen for Christa. Her team was like, don't do that to her. She's housed right now at Deborah Johnson, which is a women's facility about, 8-10 miles away, I think. So that's not going to happen. What essentially everybody has agreed is we'll keep her at Deborah Johnson. We want to reduce her stress, the immense stress that she says she faces, with all of the potential for men to be looking at her, whether you think that's a legit point or not. So they will wait until no earlier, I think they said, than 24 hours before the execution, which is September 30, as you said, and bring her to Riverbend, and they will do their best to ensure the goal, as the warden of Riverbend said, to have women be looking at her. Another, I think, potential concession, I'll be curious to see if Judge Ward mentions this, but you mentioned the clinical psychologist. The subject came up, okay, what if we sort of give her some mini breaks from being constantly watched, like 30-minute breaks where she can take a shower and she will know nobody is staring at her or peering at her. She can eat or what have you. And the clinical psychologist on her behalf said, oh, yes, that would definitely help, and I think you might see something like that. The other thing that was mentioned as essentially a concession, and by the way, we don't get to see any of this because it's deep behind closed doors, is that there is a privacy screen that they may put up that will afford her some privacy as she is held, and I think it's the capital punishment unit at Riverbend, awaiting the moment when she's then taken to the death chamber. Those are concessions. You could call those wins. I'll be curious, I know you will as well, to see what Judge Ward sort of recommends or decides emerged from the hearing that would benefit her, if you will.
So let's take it from there. So he has heard all of this. What are the next steps in this situation?
I was just going to mention real quick some of the losses, if I can, summarizing.
Definitely.
My hunch is they're really hoping that the court system will decide the lethal injection process is so horrible that we can't subject her to it. I felt like this was a bit of a gamble on their part. I think the hanging thing is something that they were throwing out there. I don't think they're going to be successful at that. I don't think the state Supreme Court will go for that. They lost in my opinion, on instances like they tried to have one of the state experts on, I believe it was on blood, he got all these records from the state, and they pointed out, but there are some of these reports for her that you didn't pay any attention to. You didn't look at them about her platelet count to show that she has this blood disorder. And her platelets, by the way, are in 400 and some thousand to 600 and some thousand, which he said, yes, those are her platelet counts, and it's true. I may have missed some of these reports and didn't see them that also had these numbers, but it doesn't matter. That's a low threat level of this blood thrombocytosis condition, and it can be managed, I believe he said, with aspirin, which I think she's taking.
Yeah, she's currently taking that. And I also think that there was a loss for Pike's team in regard to actually bringing any of these experts in to test her anytime recently. I think that the last time, I don't even remember off the top of my head, but I do remember them bringing up that you guys are bringing in this suggestion and speculation as to what could happen to her, but there's not any facts on the table that this is going to happen. And I think that if they had maybe brought in someone to test an IV on her or something like that and prove that she's going to face these type of difficulties, it could have strengthened their argument. But because they didn't, I do think that the state kind of fought back on them, being like, you didn't bring us what you needed to prove that this could happen, just the speculation that it might.
So where does it go from here?
Well, it's fast-tracked. It has to be, because, as we've said, September 30th is the date when her execution is set. So between now and then, a lot of things have to happen. The judge said, he told the courtroom that the poor court reporter, who's been sitting there going like this for 3 solid days, and that's a lot of work.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Constant, and you're trying to get it all down. It's amazing what she does. Has to prepare a transcript, so that's got to be done by midweek of it's actually this coming week, and then he has to get a report together. Oh, the lawyers also can submit further paperwork, and then the court must by Friday, August the 21st, a week from us having this conversation, submit his findings of fact and conclusions of law to the Tennessee Supreme Court, which then must evaluate what it thinks needs to be done, if anything, about her execution method. That is not the end of it, however, as it never is. This will surely go up to the United States Supreme Court, maybe on multiple fronts. There is so much hue and cry, so much going on with questions about Tennessee's method. We heard the attorney for the ACLU describing what happened in May. We've got that on the very last day of the hearing, where Nicole and I were following testimony and listening to the lawyers. Tennessee executed another man at River Bend, Darrell Hines, and there is just a lot of heat right now legally over how the state has handled executions by lethal injection. So we're going to see a lot of last-minute efforts to get the attention of whoever the lawyers can get to pay attention before we get to September 30th. And we do not know what ultimately will happen as we sit here today. We do not know. We know there's a date. We may be going to Nashville to cover that, or it may get put off. She might win a reprieve. We don't know.
We just wait and see. 30 years is a long time, and we have really dug into what has played out in the courtroom, but we cannot lose sight of the victim in all this. Once again, a young woman, Colleen Slemmer, a torturous death. John, throughout the years, you have stayed in touch with her mother, May Martinez. Have you been talking to her of late in this lead up to the scheduled execution?
I communicate with May pretty regularly. She lives in Florida. I check in with her. I'm like, hey, how are you? Are you doing okay? May has been through a lot. I cannot fathom having a daughter experience what Colleen went through. May's suffered other losses in her life that are profound, wrenching losses. But through the years, I've been like, hang in there, May, hang in there. This is not over with yet, and we don't know what's going to happen. I think she's a bit pessimistic, but a week or two before this hearing that Nicole and I covered, I messaged her and I said, I want to make sure you're aware of this, that it's coming up. She said, yes, I know, but I can't come. I do know that if the execution does go forward, it is her plan to come up from Florida to witness it. There's a special chamber just for family, and that's where May will be if this does happen. It sounds kind of grim and ghoulish, but from where witnesses sit when the blinds are lifted and you're looking straight at the gurney where the inmate is lying, there is a small chamber with glass where you can see family members peering in from that angle at the inmate. So I would imagine if this goes forward, and if we're there to witness it, that we will see May there as well, witnessing it.
This is a more personal question directed to you as a journalist. And Nicole, we are so happy you are part of the WBIR team. You have been here a couple of months. And
2 months.
Exactly.
And we're glad.
And we are very glad. Excellent reporter. This, I have to imagine, is one of your first experiences in covering something of this magnitude. How do you take it in? How did you take it in? And how do you process what you listened to and experienced from 30 years ago as it still plays out to today?
Well, I've definitely, I won't say lucky enough is the right word to say it, but I had an internship in Minnesota last summer when Melissa Hortman was assassinated, and that was a pretty intense thing to experience as an intern. So I do think that at least I had that foundation of knowing how to deal with something so intense and something so public, and but that was playing out as I was there. This is something 30 years ago.
Exactly.
My parents didn't even know each other yet, so I did my homework, definitely looked back on the information that we had, the reportings that WBR has done, to make sure I was prepared for this. I also looked into her appeal. I looked into all the things that she was requesting and her team was requesting, to make sure I was ready, because I am fairly new to not only being a professional journalist, but anything that has to do with the court. And so I wanted to make sure that even though I am so new, I'm 2 months here from tomorrow, so I wanted to make sure that I was able to give the most precise and factual journalism for the public to have here.
You did an excellent job.
Thank you.
John, as we mentioned at the top, you are a longtime journalist. You were one of the first reporters on this story, and now 30 years later in the courtroom this past week. It had to be almost surreal in some respects that this story is still continuing.
Yeah, it's a very odd sort of continuum, if you will. I mean, in my head, I'm the same person I was 30 or 40 years ago, right? I mean, we go about our daily lives, thinking who we are, what we are, but then I was sitting in the courtroom or wandering around the city-county building, and everybody knew what was going on with that hearing, and I'm running into people who I've known 30 years who have been in the judicial system, and they're like, you're one of the only people left from this case originally, because the judge in the courtroom, Christa's judge, she's retired, Judge Leibowitz, still very much with us and a terrific human being, but she's retired. The two prosecutors are gone. They've died. The defense attorneys have left the scene. There's just the main investigator in the case is retired now, Randy York. He is one of the people that journalists and film crews approach to talk about this case, and I text him every once in a while. May stays in contact with Randy because Randy was the one who interviewed Christa and actually went back to the scene with her. But sitting in that courtroom, like you said, it was very surreal, and it's just hard to describe the idea that I covered that case during the trial 30 years ago, and we are coming to this moment in time. It's just odd.
And once again, we wait to hear what the Supreme Court, ultimately, possibly the U.S. Supreme Court, has to say going forward. But at this point, Christa Gale Pike set to be executed in Tennessee on September 30th next month. John North, Nicole Borman, thank you so much. We do appreciate you. And we thank you for watching Behind the Headline. Stay with us. More streaming right after this.